Hi, my name is Nariman. I'm a product design instructor at the GUC. I also work as a product designer in several fields in Egypt in the market, such as furniture design and industrial design. And I'll be talking about some of my experiences with also doing research regarding sustainability. And I'm currently working on my PhD research at the GUC related to education. So I'll also be linking that into the presentation. So a very brief aim about the presentation and what I want to achieve with this is basically to run you through some of my own experiences with sustainability. And I do believe that sustainability is one of those things, like, for example, the pandemic. It's impossible to say that someone has not had an experience with it. So even if someone has been conscious about it but has not been applying it, they're still experiencing it in one way or another. And I also believe that sustainability is one of those things where we need to start and we need to begin the conversation. So the conversation cannot start with this is correct and this is incorrect. There is no right or wrong. So again, this is basically the aim of the presentation, as well as maybe providing some insights or different perspectives into working, especially working as a designer in the field of sustainability in Egypt. So it might be also interesting for some. So very briefly about my experience, the first time that I was aware of the environmental impacts that are occurring was when I was in school in Wales, and we had this group of activists called Surfers Against Sewage. They would basically go around schools or companies and they would, provide awareness campaigns for the impact that really happens in the environment, especially in the oceans. So that was really the first time that, it was eye-opening for me to begin this journey. The second time that was also very eye-opening was at the GUC in one of the courses where we started to get introduced into some design solutions that have been actually applied real life. And this was the first time that I could start to see the actual impact and the actual potential of a designer and what a designer can really offer, especially to people and to real life circumstances. So on the left, this is a design called Q-Drum. And basically the design here really solves a problem with people who have to, carry a very large container from their homes to the place where they get clean water. So the designers here solved it in a way that it does not have to be carried, but it can be, pulled by the users. And therefore the sustainable solution here has a lot of impact on a lot of people's lives. And on the right-hand side, the life straw is also one of those examples where it solves a huge problem for a lot of people, that if they have this product and this design, they'd have, clean water everywhere that they go. So these are just some examples of the first designs that I started to really see the potential and get really interested in sustainability and in product design. And here we show that these are two different processes that designers follow. And a lot of people believe that designers, they don't follow a process. They're creatives and they just come up with ideas and they're random. And although creativity is part of the experience and the skill of being a designer, you still have to follow a certain process. And especially as a sustainable designer, it can't just be left to luck or inspiration. There's still many processes that people follow, as well as processes that one can also invent, or one can also create their own system of applying and creating a sustainable design. So here, this is the design thinking process, one of the most famous design processes. And on the right-hand side, this is also the human-centered design process used a lot by IDEO, which are also a company that create a lot of sustainable solutions, especially social sustainability. So this leads, supported by this quote attributed to Kant, which states that theory without practice is empty and practice without theory is blind. So you can't have one without the other. You can't just be practicing sustainability without really following a certain process or a system, and you can't really invent a system and say it's not practiced. So this is somehow the approach that I started early on using in my work. And I'll just begin showing some of the projects that I've been working on since 2010. So this is the breakdown of the presentation. I broke down the projects into three main categories that exist. And you'll find on the top the research part. So all of the research, all of the projects, of course, need research background. And then there are some projects that have to do with really designing and developing a design. Some have to do with material and production exploration. And then some have to do with linking educational methods and sustainability. And this is the final step. And the practical outcomes that I create, they're either related to systems by design. So while doing the design, the system is created, or the design through a system. So first you have the system, you invent it, and then you follow it, you practice it, and see what the outcome is, and then test the results. So this is the first project that I really was involved in sustainability, which was my bachelor project. And this was when I started to really look at the amount of waste that is created, especially in industrial factories in Egypt. So I wanted to look at the waste that comes out of those factories and what happens to it, where does it go in the end? And what I found through this research, which is shown here in the diagram, was that a lot of the companies, they have this waste that's produced and they either burn it or they throw it away. Some do try to reuse it, but not all of the companies do. So they just want to get rid of the waste that comes out of it. And this was the research process of documenting all of the companies that I found. On the other hand side, I also looked into the actual small workshops that exist in Egypt and to see, well, where do they get their own materials? And what I found is they're so dependent on waste materials instead of buying their own raw materials. However, there is not really a communication platform between the industrial companies and the small workshops. And this was when I started to think, well, this is where the impact of the designer begins to be apparent. So now the designer is the middleman. So the industrial company wants to get rid of the materials. However, they don't really want to contact those small workshops. The workshops don't really go to the companies, and therefore the designer is the one that gets the materials. The designer also has an important role here, where they have the power to create a design that can be sold to the market, and therefore the social impact and the economic impact of sustainability is apparent. So the designer can then offer designs and therefore offer also economic growth to the small workshops. So this was the system that I created, and then I followed it through by applying it from start to finish, from going to a large factory in Egypt that designs using glass, and being the designer that created the design, and then offering it to the small workshops and then testing it out. The next project that I was involved in that had to do with sustainability was the Biomimicry Student Design Challenge that I found in 2012 while working on my master's. So this had to do with a group called Biomimicry Institute, and they offer an annual design challenge that's international. It's open to everyone. And I applied in it with a group of my colleagues also from the GUC. And my aim was to start to learn about what is biomimicry, because my master's project was focusing on nature-inspired design solutions. So when I entered the competition, I began to understand the link between biomimicry and sustainability. So I had these two interests together, but this was the first time that they linked together. And it was really, again, eye-opening because it made a lot of sense. It states that basically biomimicry is you're copying or you're mimicking anything that is in nature. And of course, this has to do with sustainability because anything in nature is, of course, sustainable. So, and it also has to do with looking towards nature as a source of information, as a source of knowledge, and then thinking, okay, how can I use this information to solve my own design problem? If I have a problem with water management, so I can look to nature and see, well, how is nature managing it? If I want to build a dam, for example, to stop water or block it, I can look at how the beavers are doing it very sustainably, very efficiently using natural materials, and then apply it in my own design. So something that's very interesting in the concept of was the example of using 3 levels. So biomimicry has the first level, which is the shallowest level. It's the level that isn't really that sustainable. It's saying that I can take the form of anything in nature and copy it and make a design out of it, which is fine. The next more sustainable level is to actually study the system and the process that this organism actually uses. So an example that I like to use here is a tree, for example. So as a designer, I can say, okay, I can use the form and create a design that uses the shape of the tree or the shape of the leaves, and that's it. I can then begin to study the process of how does this tree actually collect maybe water or food from the ground, and how does it use this? So I can maybe apply it in my own mechanical design. And then the third stage is actually looking at the ecosystem that exists in nature. So can I look at these trees and how they communicate together? And maybe in this case, I can make a new application or a new app design. Or maybe I can actually create a business plan that's inspired by the ecosystem. So this is the beauty of using biomimicry for sustainable reasons. And very briefly, to start to do this, you begin to ask questions. How does nature produce energy or optimize strength or grow? And looking to nature for the solutions and then beginning to apply it to your own design. So back to the example of the competition, we actually ended up winning the competition in 2013 for our sustainable design for the Fayoum area. And we also created a business plan to support our design. And very briefly, the design had to do with creating a sustainable solution for the water to flow naturally in the agriculture in Egypt, because what we found through our research was that farmers are still depending on diesel pumps to carry water into their farms. So instead of that, we decided to create this proposal or this solution. And then this moved on to another project that I was involved in with a colleague of mine. And we were then asked by a company called Daima Journeys to create the first biomimetic designs in Egypt. And Daima is a company that also creates biomimicry awareness and education to school children. They take them on trips around Egypt and then they teach them about biomimicry on ground. So this was our research. We looked to several organisms and we really wanted to create products that can be used during these trips that Daima offer. So after our research, we again started to design. And what was interesting here was that biomimicry offers its own design process. And it offers it in a way that you should be following steps 1, 2, 3, and 4 in this sequence. However, what we noticed as designers, because we already have our own, toolkit or our own design process, was that we started off with applying our own design process, but then integrating the idea of nature-inspired and biomimicry in the middle. So because this actually happened, we did come up with design solutions and we created, prototypes and proposals for the company, but we ended up using our own system, our own process. And this was the actual outcome that we had for this research project. So it was unique because it followed a way of thinking that can be applied by future designers and future researchers. So the next category in the presentation of projects was material and production exploration. So we have a lot of, palm tree materials existing in Egypt, and a unique material that we have is actually the palm tree midrib, which comes out of the middle part of the leaves of the palm tree. So this material exists, and what normally happens is it's either burned or it's either, cut into pieces and, no one's using it. So this was a research project where we wanted to look at, the potential of having this material in production in Egypt and how to really convince the market to begin to buy products using this material. And in the research, what we noticed is the market, unfortunately, they will not buy a product simply because it's sustainable. So there has to be other product offerings that support the product. And this was plotted here in the diagram in the middle. So the product has to be trendy, versatile, it has to be, clever or smart, it has to have a function. It can't just exist simply because it's using this material. What we also noticed is that the people that are involved in using and making something with the material are, on the one hand, the designer, and on the other hand, the engineer and the manufacturer. And we noticed that they do not speak the same language. The designer understands and observes and sees the material in one way, and the engineer sees it in another way, through, looking at the durability, the strength, the practical aspects of the material, and the designer looks more towards the aesthetics and the soft aspects of the material, which is fine. However, they need to coexist in a multidisciplinary way, that in the end they come together and they offer this offering that has to do with the market needs in the middle. So this was the process that we followed for this project in the end. And then another research project that was interesting because of how it linked to the idea of biomimicry, nature-inspired solutions, was this concept of regenerative design. And personally, I believe that this topic has a lot of potential as a research topic. However, for us, it was done in a proposal for a system, but it was still not tested enough. So I really encourage that this is looked into more. The idea behind regenerative design is that first it states that it has to do with living systems and really understanding how a living organism and living system works. So it comes from that. The other thing is that it states that sustainability, if you look to the diagram on the top, you see that sustainability is actually in the middle. So you're sustaining, you're stagnant. It's not improving and it's not getting worse. It's just 0.0. What regenerative design is offering is saying, we want to then create growth. We want to then create improvements. So a regenerative system is maybe something that has like a loophole or a circulating system to say, for example, here we looked at the recycling system that can be offered in the GUC. How can I take this material and regenerate this wasted material and then put it into the system back and forth? So this just was one of those topics where I wanted to introduce it. And so now we begin linking things together, especially related to this educational part, biomimicry and sustainability, these three topics together. And this was, again, back when I was doing my master's degree, because I wanted to look into, well, how can we start teaching biomimicry to our students? So now we can see the potential of biomimicry, can see the potential of what it has regarding sustainability. Now we want to see how can we actually teach it to our students so that it fits into the way we're teaching them product design and not just teaching them biomimicry from the very beginning. And what I did here is that I created several processes for educational methods and educational methods. And I tested them out in several situations, like teaching at the GUC and also in workshops such as this one in ICE Cairo. And I wanted to include different ways of introducing biomimicry into the actual design process. And finally, I ended up with creating a process that first plotted out the steps that a designer follows, which is very similar to the design thinking process that we talked about at the start. And then here integrating the steps that are followed by actually looking to nature and biomimicry. So these were the plotted steps to propose that this could be a way of teaching biomimicry to design students. And this also has to do with design education and also looking at systems and living organisms. So I started to think, okay, well, biomimicry has to do with looking at strategies and looking at systems in nature. I wanted to start looking also at what other systems exist in nature and how can this inspire my own unique system. So one of the systems that exist is called self-organization. And we see this in a lot of organisms in nature, such as birds or ants. And they use this method to do something called flocking. And flocking basically means, moving together as a group from point A to point B. And I started to look at self-organization in order to apply it for group projects in education. Because we have this problem where whenever we introduce a group project, especially in design, we have all of the students going off in different directions and they don't really flock from one side to another. So I wanted to use this self-organizing system and test it out. The other interesting aspect of this system is that it could be used to create autonomous students. And I created a method which follows the principle of flocking and basically states that the instructor should only be involved in the yellow parts with the students, and the other parts, the students should be left themselves to become autonomous. Because what I observed from my research was that students, especially in group projects, they rely a lot on the instructor and they get the feedback continuously from the teacher until eventually it ends up to be the project of the teacher and not of the students. So here, to explain further the self-organizing system, it explains it in feedback loops, and it explains it in a way that there's a positive feedback where the birds, for example, they want to come together, they want to be cohesive, and they're attracted to each other. But if they're too attracted to each other, they'll just crash into each other. So what happens in this system was there's cohesion, they're attracted to each other, but then in the middle here, there's separation. There's a negative feedback loop where they're almost repulsed by each other and they want to stay away from each other. And then there's a third positive feedback where they're attracted to each other again, and then they come together. And this cycle of, back and forth is the method of flocking. And this was interesting for me, and I applied it in this system where I proposed, okay, here, this is the positive feedback of the students on the left-hand side, where they get together, they become a group, they're attracted to each other, okay, they sit together, they're given the project brief, and then they're told, okay, now you have to separate and, give yourself some time to think individually as a student, and then come together again. And when they do come together, the teacher here is involved in the yellow, and this should hopefully create a flocking system for group projects. So I tested this out on students in a one-day workshop where this was the first positive loop and then the second one. And I analyzed what they were doing throughout the project. I also created an interview and a questionnaire with them at the end. And what I noticed was that I compared their experience in this group project with a previous experience that they had with another group project. And here the circles represent an individual person. And I highlighted the categories that were surprisingly, positive. So here the students had a more positive outcome satisfaction. The group dynamic was more positive. The project structure and process was much more positive than the previous experience. And finally, the overall general satisfaction. So this is one of those topics where I'm proposing it. It's very interesting. It has a lot of potential, especially when it comes to creating sustainability. And the understanding of sustainability here is saying, well, sustainability also has to do with creating sustainable students. We want them to be able to be their own autonomous designers in the end. So this is the true impact and potential this has. It's also one of those things where if it's applied from someone else's background in a different faculty or a different point of view, it can also get out, more results. And then finally, I'd like to show some of the bachelor student projects that I have regarding different material explorations that some of the students had with also sustainable design in Egypt. So these two projects had to focus with the midrib material that we talked about previously. And they actually solved what was proposed in this process or this system that I explained, because they noticed that when they show and when they talk about this specific material to the market and to users, it's not accepted at all. People would say, I don't want trash or garbage that's in my house, because they automatically represent this midrib material with what we have in Egypt, for example, is these baskets that they put bread on, or they have, fruits in these baskets. So the market automatically thinks this is a cheap material, I don't want it in my house. The potential of having a design is that it can really validate the material and show the potential of this material, and therefore really market it and sell it to the end consumer. The next project that a student had was she wanted to focus on the educational aspect of sustainability, where she said that if we start early on, we have a greater potential to, change the minds of people long term. So here she wanted to focus on teaching sustainability to young students and young children. So she created this textual book. The book has to do with sustainability mainly in two ways. She collaborated with a company, an organization called APE, where they focus on recycling materials. So she recycled the fabrics to create this texture book. And the other thing is every single page inside of this book teaches the children about different aspects of sustainability, whether it's about recycling or it's about, reusing or making something. So this was the second project. And then a third project that also has to do with the fabric waste material was this student here. She wanted to look into the materials that come out of fabric companies and large companies. And again, she noticed that there's a lot of waste that comes out of them, especially fabric waste that are not being used. So she applied them into these, sustainable t-shirts. Again, this really shows the impact of having a design, because in her research, what she found is people refused when she asked them, would you be willing to wear something that had to do with recycling fabric waste? Of course, everyone said no. When they saw the impact of the design, they accepted it, and therefore they would be willing to buy it and to encourage it. So it's a way of, creating sustainability, even if it's not the first goal, it's still in there. So that was basically some of the projects, the experiences that I wanted to share with everyone. And the conclusion of the presentation is, first, in order to actually achieve something and to create something, we first need to be able to teach it and to educate our students. So of course, we need to be educating them more about sustainability, and especially the impact design has on creating sustainable solutions and having a strong impact. The second thing is, of course, getting involved in more multidisciplinary projects. So all of these projects had to do with looking and collaborating with from the engineering point of view. The example about the biomimicry competition, we had to do business planning. So of course, being involved in these types of projects and offering it to our students, which is why this platform of this conference is really important. We can also start to look at research from different perspectives. So here, these are from the design perspective. Of course, if they're applied or looked at from other perspectives, there's also, a lot of opportunities. Applying this research and theory, again, from your own unique backgrounds. Of course, constantly creating awareness. This is, of course, one of those things where we should all be doing it. And finally, applying sustainability challenges into all of our courseworks as educators. Of course, if we have, something that teaches students specifically about sustainable development as a course or a curriculum, of course, this would be, very beneficial. But if we don't have that yet, at least we can start to involve them maybe in assignments or projects that have to do with sustainable challenges. And finally, to begin the conversation, to open up some questions to think about. So how can we as academics teach Egyptian students about sustainability? What I noticed regarding things like biomimicry and also sustainability is that there's a lot of research done internationally about how to teach it to students. I believe there's less that has to do with teaching it to our unique Egyptian students. So this is one thing to also start to think about, and understanding our students, how they think, how they're motivated, how they work, and then teaching them. What areas in the field still need to be studied, and how can we study them? How can we create inter-faculty or inter-university collaborations together? Maybe how can we push for further awareness? And finally, what projects can be developed regarding sustainability, especially now, hopefully post-pandemic. So thank you for your attention and for listening. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions, and you'll find my email addresses at the bottom as well.
Thank you, Nariman. I think this was it's the perfect way actually to close this this conference today. I think you gave us a very interesting practical perspective that ties everything together very nicely. Your conclusion was very interesting, and I wanna build on it a few remarks before we open the floor for any questions or final remarks. I think this idea of biomimicry or regenerative design is very interesting, and I think you mentioned also it should be it can lead to many changes in educational pedagogy. And we should think about, for example, if we want to raise more awareness about sustainability, then the education process has to be incorporated as well. And maybe also on school level, not just university level. You might think of using this to develop different pedagogical methods for school children. This would be very interesting, an interesting project. And I think also you tied very nicely this idea of design thinking, and if we have sustainable design thinking to develop sustainable products, and then we can actually in the end have more sustainable cities, actually, if we look on a macro level, which you talked about also at the beginning of this conference. And I think this idea of connecting and building bridges between disciplines is very important, and I hope that we can maintain this event eventually, that we can have more events like this, interdisciplinary and looking at different perspectives of how sustainability can be actually advanced. So these are some of the comments and actually some of the thoughts that I got from your presentation. It was very interesting. I think it was very, very practical. I think the audience also have learned a lot from it, and it ties everything very nicely. So I think we can now have some final questions or remarks before we close the day. Anyone has any questions or comments?
Actually, I did have one quick question. First of all, thank you for the presentation. That was really excellent. So you made a good point that different cultures and different countries, they're going to be different understandings of sustainability. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm very curious. So what is sort of the a more Egyptian perspective on what are some of the issues and understandings and maybe historical perspectives that would help us appreciate how this does change by region and culture?
Okay. So off the top of my head, a conversation that we have a lot in the department especially is the experiences of our students, especially product design. So, and I know this firsthand because my experience at school was in Wales. So I was involved with design from an earlier age. So in grade 10 and grade 11, we have woodworking, and we have all of these textiles and sewing. So there's a lot of practical things that are involved, using them by hand. And so when you enter university, you have these skills already there. What we noticed maybe here is there's less of it, and certainly not all of the students that enter would have taken a design course previously. Some do, not all of them do. So this is just one example of maybe this could be thought about, okay, how can we either, like Dr. Noha said, is apply it earlier on in schools, or maybe think about, okay, what exercises can I offer for students to really know, okay, what are they doing at homes or in their own, experiences in their lifestyles, but maybe they're not taking it at school, which is fine, but what else are they taking previously? And then how can I create assignments and exercises to offer them based on their previous knowledge, because it does differ from one country to another.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, I think everybody's tired by now. I think I want to, oh, Professor Zabina, okay, go ahead, please.
I just want to thank you, Professor Noah, for arranging all of this, including your colleagues, because I think it is a chance for all of us. To be honest, I was a little bit afraid that we have a bunch of topics which we can't connect, but it connects. It connects somehow to all the SDG goals. So I think it's nice. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to, to get together on this kind of way and to learn from each other. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. I hope that everyone got something out of it. And I hope that we can maintain these kinds of interdisciplinary gatherings and create not just interdisciplinary or also cross-cultural dialogue about these issues to kind of advance the agenda further. Yeah, thank you all for being here and for joining us today.